Hey there everyone, Russ Hamilton here. Anyway, wanted to do this particular video for a while now. I had done one very similar to it, but unfortunately I sold the rights to it, and unfortunately it's not out there on the internet anywhere that I can find it right now, and so I had to do this all over again. But I think that this is going to be one of the best training videos that you've ever seen. I think that this is going to help everyone, think more tactically, think more strategically, act more decisively, and overall bring more to the correctional game, as it were. So, all right, so let's get started. So, when I first started the academy back in the Stone Age, I was introduced to a little game called the What If game. And the What If game goes something like this. It's just, hey, what would I do if A, B, or C happened? And what that does is that allows you to become familiar with things that are likely to happen, things that are probably going to happen, and things that you have to kind of orient yourself toward with regards to what your resources are and the things that you do to actually start that chain of response, okay? So typically it goes like this. It's like, what would I do if those three inmates over there started fighting? And so, we start out with the general thing. Well, the first thing I would do is I would get on the radio and make an announcement, or I would activate my alarm. And then once I would do that, I would, take some other proactive issues, tell them to get down, wait for responding staff to come back me up. Then maybe we look towards what we're going to do with what we're going to do as far as use of force goes. And then we're going to use our force, whatever that is, if they don't stop. And, we're going to deploy pepper spray. Maybe we're going to bring block guns out there. Maybe we're just going to go hands-on if it's really simple and it's safe to do so. That familiarizes yourself with the chain of events that has to happen when we have alarm response, right? We have to know what those resources are. We have to know what we can do. We have to be able to make all of the calls and do all of that stuff. And so it's important for us when we learn that stuff, because we want our initial kind of judgment decisions to happen as far down the chain as we can. And what I mean by that is everything should be automatic to a point. Once we get to the point where we actually have to approach those inmates that are fighting or whatever, then we might have to make a decision. What kind of force are we going to use? These are all tactical events. It's pretty straightforward. And that's where we get to the what if part of it. What would I do if? We can keep throwing things in there. What would I do if this inmate ran up and tried to punch me? What would I do if I saw someone, grab another staff member and try and wrestle them to the ground? And the list just goes on and on and on. But that is Corrections 101. What I want to teach you in this video is how to take that 2 steps further and to be able to become an even better officer, a more efficient officer, a safer officer, a more critical thinking officer. Because this is going to do all of that. This is going to not only teach you how to think about responding to things, but it's going to teach you critical thinking skills as well. All right. So let's jump right into this. Let's talk about the best way for me to teach this to you and the best way for you to take it back to other people and teach it to them. So I mentioned before that this is kind of a 3-step approach. And that first step is indeed the what if game, right? That's what we think about as being the tactical level. We're going to progress all the way to the 3rd level, which is the strategic. And I have an analogy for this. And the analogy is not perfect. But it goes like this. If you guys have ever written reports, you know that we start out with reports that go from first person. That's the best way to do it. But this is not about report writing. This is about, being able to play the what if game at all levels, right? So that first level is the first person perspective. It's that perspective from which we always start with the what would I do if? All right, and it's simple, and I've already explained that to you. As we progress along that field, though, from our left to our right here, though, and we get into that second area, we can start thinking about the second person approach, where if you know anything about writing and stuff, you know the second person approach is sort of the you approach, right? And that you approach generally means is that we're examining, from my point of view in this, what inmates are doing. It's almost as if, you know, we were an actual writer and we were deciding, hey, what are the motivations of this inmate? And even though we refer to them as you, in our mind, we're starting to think about them from the standpoint of is what would inmates in this situation, in my yard, in my area, what would they be involved in? All right. And when we start thinking about those things, it allows us to start cracking the motivations, right? And motivations are important, right? Different inmates, they might be motivated by the gang. Different ones might be motivated by getting high. Different ones might be motivated by having some kind of hustle where they're making money, which might be dope. It might be phones. It might be something to do with those STGs and gangs. So as you start to think about that, you want to start to think about the why. And so we progress from the what if game to the why are inmates doing that game. And this is very important. This is what allows you to see beyond those layers of the onion. It allows you to try and understand just what's going on in a manner that allows you to get ahead of it. It gives you a better perspective. It enables you to actually, you know, stamp it out. You know, prevent and preempt are the two words that I use all the time about that. And so I'll just give you one example in order to get into the heads of these individuals. And I'm going to tell you the most important thing that you can learn about getting into their heads is empathy. All right. And empathy just means a perspective. It just means that you're actually able to understand their motivations. And it means that you're able to try and make some really good guesses as to what they might be involved in. So I had this one young officer who came up to me one night and he says, hey, how is it that you are able to do all the things you do with regards to finding cell phones and weapons and things like that? And so I just took this person aside. I said, okay, we're going to go look at some things. I'm going to tell you what I see, and I'm going to try and explain to you how I get into people's heads, how I evaluate the things that I see. And it's all about this why game. Why did inmates do this? Why did inmates do that? So the first thing we did is we cracked in and we went into this little living area, and there's a day room out there, and there's some beds like in a dorm going down the way there. And as I stepped in, I saw, you know, a couple people look up. You know, I saw one guy who had just started to get up off of his bed, and he had turned and his back was toward me and he had looked back. All right. And that is a perfectly normal response. Absolutely. Right. So as we started to come down that area through that row of beds to them, then what happened is he looked back over his shoulder one more time, and instantly, right, in my mind, why did he do that? Why did he look back twice? Why was once not enough? And so as I approached with my partner, I said, hey, I'm going to pull him aside, look underneath his pillow right there. And so he went over, pulled up the pillow, cell phone right there. So this begins to explain to you to be asking those questions, those why questions. Why is an inmate doing this, that, or the other thing? It can be taking a second look. It might be why they're suddenly, you know, looking up at you and walking away from an area, right? Why would I walk away from an area suddenly when I look startled? Well, maybe there's something in that area that they don't want you to see. Maybe they have something on them. Time to learn to play that particular part of what this game entails. All right, now let's talk about the things that will prevent you from effectively using the whole why game and putting that at your disposal. So I already said that the best thing that you can have is empathy. But empathy requires that you be able to actually put yourself in to the perspective that someone else sees things from. And the number one thing, in my opinion, that stops us from doing that is projection. We tend to project our morals, our feelings, our motivations onto inmates. And that's a bad thing, right? Because we assume that because we wouldn't do something, or because we would do something, that they would not do, or they would do those things also, right? The kind of thing that you or I would never do is, we would never, go down to the liquor store and we start to get pulled over. Hey, we got some dope in the car. And so, hey, let's start throwing shots at the cops. Well, we just wouldn't do that. They perhaps would. They have a different level of risk acceptance than we do. Our risk acceptance is very low. Their risk acceptance is very high. So when I start talking to people, in different situations, when I say an inmate is or is not risk averse, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm speaking to. And we have to understand that those things that affect them may not affect us. Those things that would affect us may not affect them. They operate at a different level. And so, they have no problem going out and slamming dope and taking a risk. Hey, let's shoot some fentanyl, whatever it is. Those are things that we're not accustomed to. And so that puts us in a position to assume that because they're out there on the yard or whatever, that they're not just suddenly going to break out in a fight. It makes us assume that, hey, as they approach us, that they have a legitimate reason to do so, and that they're not going to punch you in the face. So that just means that we have to be on our guard at all times. We have to put ourselves into a position where we are not surprised by the outcomes generated by the things that they do. So that's the key to this why thing. When you start asking those questions, is being able to unfold that empathy, understand what their motivations are, understand their perception of the world, and then not to project our own morals, values, feelings, etc. into them. Because you will just get back things that don't make any sense. Well, they might make sense to you, but how would I put this exactly? They make sense to you, but they don't make sense to them. So this is that point. And this is what I'm trying to tell you, how this is going to make you better able to make decisions as you're out there doing tactical things, as you're moving toward the more strategic. And we're going to talk more about the strategic as we move along in this thing. And I think it's really going to open your eyes what the difference is between this side of the equation, which is the tactical, and this side, which is the strategic. All right, so now that we've crossed from the what if to the why, we're going to go on over all the way into the strategic side of things now. And this is the, if this is the I and this is the you, this is the they. And the they encompasses a whole lot more people. And the they, if you know about writing anything, you write it from the third person. When you're writing from the third person, a lot of times you tend to have what's called omniscience, right? You know what's going on with all of the different groups. You know what's going on with, characters X, Y, and Z in your story. And so it's a great thing. So what you can do in this case, though, is even though you don't have omniscience, what you can do is you can have a perspective of how things operate in the big picture world. This side over here, that's on the side of just being the tactical. It's a very small world, right? And the main thing about it to remember is it's easy. This is the most basic, right? This is the thing where your level of understanding being front line is just fine there. But we want to refine all those things you do. We want to put you into a position where you can operate in this why, and that you can go over to this part here where we're asking the bigger questions. This is the how, right? This is the how of how all things operate from this side of the equation all the way down to the more simple things that we see. So what I'll tell you is this. I've got a few stories here, and these are real life examples to one extent or another. And what they do is they serve to illustrate where people go wrong. What are the things that they fail to consider? What are the things that they fail to think about when they're trying to get themselves into a position to think strategically, act tactically, and be decisive in the things that they do? All right. So let's get started with story one. Story one is just a class that I have at times taught, and it goes something like this. I'm going to put you all into a scenario, and I want you to quickly think your way through the scenario just as fast as you can. You or some of your officers, maybe you and your partner, are doing a search. It's the daytime, things are in full swing around the institution, and during the search you come across an inmate manufactured grappling hook in a cell, along with some sheets that have been braided into some rope. All right, what is the first thing that you do to start securing this crime scene and processing it? Just go in your own mind for just a second here. So that's the way that I laid it out to the people that I was teaching the class. It was pretty much exactly in that fashion. A little bit of duplicity on my part, a little bit of language skills right there, a little bit of neuro-linguistic programming, as it were. But they all started to come up with great answers. Hey, I would find the inmates that had that cell, and I would cuff them up, and I would have them escorted to X, Y, and Z, and I would have a camera brought across, and we would go through the crime scene, and we'd finish going ahead and searching the rest of the cell, and we'd get them medically cleared to be placed in ad seg. Maybe some of, if you have on-site investigators, maybe they're going to Mirandize these guys, and it was great, man. They just went through boom, 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 doing all this stuff, right? So what are they doing? Is they are operating at the tactical level, and that's good for officers. It's not good if you're in administration. You should not be concerned with the tactical just right then. You should be concerned with the strategic, because what the strategic tells us and what we want to get into are the critical thinking skills that allow us to put ourselves in a better position in case something much more nefarious is going on. So it just goes like this, is why did they not say that, hey, the first thing that I would do is I would recall the yard and do a count and do a staff accountability, right? And then at the same time that was going on, I would be calling and making sure that we had, outside law enforcement were helping us patrol and start an outer perimeter, and maybe go ahead and just tick off those things that at the time are not the most apparent. This is where you get into, once again, critical thinking. You are taking into account the things that you haven't necessarily seen as being apparent. And that's why, these people, when I was doing the class, they just automatically started biting in to a scenario, and they just kind of chopped it off. Well, this is what happened. We kind of automatically knew or know that, these inmates didn't get a chance to escape. But once again, we don't know what the outer perimeter of their plan was. And so it's being able to do all of those things and insert ourselves in a way where we can actually interrupt, that cycle of violence. We can interrupt that cycle of criminality. We can interrupt the cycle of that particular incident in order to do what really we get paid to do, which is keep things safe, keep things secure, and make sure that we really truly have a safe institution. So anyway, the whole exercise turned out to be kind of revelatory in the way that people think, in the way that they start to think about one thing, they assume that things along the way are as they appear, and they forget about other factors that they have not yet considered, entertained, or tried to dissect in any way. And so that's the whole key to truly becoming a critical thinker, It's being able to, foresee potential outcomes and things that might have happened without any indication yet that they have. So I have another story. It's one that Anthony Ganji and I kicked around at one time. It's on another video somewhere, but I'm not even sure which one. That also really kind of addresses this idea about the things that you are not aware of, the things that you haven't considered that may have happened. And if you treat everything down at the tactical level, you're going to miss things along the way. You're going to miss things that could potentially save lives. You're going to miss things that could potentially keep you out of harm's way. You're potentially going to miss things that might, cost you your career if you're not careful. So we were having a discussion on Tier Talk, and basically we were talking about, what would you do if you were looking around and for some reason you had set down your keys and you couldn't find them, and you started looking around and it took a little while, and then an inmate said that he found them over here, somewhere else in the room, a desk, what have you, right? And then what would happen is you would just be, whoo, man, I'm glad I didn't have to, start the tactical level here and warn my supervisor, but here is the thing, is we don't know what happened. We know that the inmate said, hey, your keys are over here. Well, how did they get there? Maybe you were over there earlier. Maybe there's a logical explanation. How long were they out of your sight, though? What are the many bad, probable, or possible things that could have happened with those keys? So right off the bat, we have to ask ourselves, number one, probably the lowest level thing, hey, maybe this inmate is playing a game. Maybe he's trying to get you into his confidence. Maybe he's trying to manipulate you. But what else might it be? Now, I'm not saying that, everything that we have to automatically respond and have a knee-jerk reaction to, and that everything is automatically the worst thing possible. But what I am saying is we have to examine these things as they happen. I mean, one thing that you might have to consider doing in a situation like this is absolutely, hey, yard recall, we're going to do a count, right? Why are we doing that? Because some inmate might possibly have taken those keys and got to somewhere that they shouldn't be. It might be one of those things where they are now actually managing to pull off an escape. So that's one of the things that we have to take into consideration. The other thing that we have to take into consideration is what? At the same time we're doing the count, we're doing staff accountability, right? Staff accountability, why are we doing that? Because that inmate might have taken those keys, might have got into some place where some other people, some other staff were. We might have hostages, we might have people that are hurt, we might have people that are dead. Am I saying that that's a likelihood? No, but it has to be one of those things that we have to take accountability for, because now we're operating under a number of different scenarios that we don't know which things might be true. This is true critical thinking. As we move that ball further and further along, we have to also make sure that none of the locks have been tampered with, that nothing has been left open, that everything has been secured. And we start taking all of these things into consideration. Maybe we might have to start an outside perimeter patrol. Maybe we might have to call outside law enforcement to start doing things. We just don't know. Are there even more nefarious things that could have happened? Maybe we're actually able to, hey, get on the camera and look and, oh yeah, hey, I dropped those keys there and just forgot that they'd been there. You shouldn't have done that, but what the heck? But maybe we can account for them. Maybe that inmate took and made a drawing on a piece of paper of what those keys look like. Maybe he did a wax impression. Maybe he did a plastic impression. These are all things that I've actually seen or known about, where inmates have actually made Folger-Adam keys out of things like plexiglass. So it's not out of the range of possibility, and we certainly don't want to discount things that may have happened. Might we have to replace every single key there? Could be, probably not, but that's why we have to start running it down, running it out to whatever the logical conclusion is. And this ultimately is how we start to actually think critically. All right. Now, I have one more short little story to tell you. This is going to actually take you through all of those places that I talked about before, where you might be using projection and assuming that inmates just wouldn't do certain things. And this is going to put you in a position to better evaluate what your tactics are, because we use tactics all day, every day. But what are the outcome of those tactics? Are those tactics sound? Are there backups built in? Are there firewalls? And those things all have to be looked at. And that's why, like I said, critical thinking, critical thinking, critical thinking. So here goes. I had one of my officers one day, he pulled into the Sally Port, right? He was bringing an inmate back from medical. He had to divest himself of some of his equipment and so forth. And so in the course of doing that, it being a very, very hot day, he left the car running inside the Sally Port and left the air conditioning going, right? So what do we think of in a situation like that? Well, we start to think of, well, we have overhead lethal, right? That's cool. We've got Sally Port. That's cool. Reinforced everything, not a problem. But here's what I told him. I said, no, we don't do these things. The reason that we don't do these things is because we assume that because an inmate's being watched, we assume that because there is, a gun potentially trained on him, we assume that because all of these things are against the inmate's favor, that he's not going to try something. We assume that he's not going to break out that window. We assume that he's not going to manage to get into that front thing. We assume that he doesn't want to be shot, right? We assume he's not going to use it as a battering ram. We assume that everything is going to be okay. We project what our stance on the things an inmate may or may not do into that inmate, and it's just wrong. Inmates are not risk averse, and I use those words all the time. Risk averse, risk averse, risk averse. They are not risk averse in the way that we are. And so we have to take those things into account. We have to be able to foresee what the consequences of our actions and our tactics are. All right, so just as a quick recap to all this thing, taking it, all the way from the tactical, all the way to the strategic, thinking about the first person, which is I, the second person, which is you, or in this case, being able to explore what's inside the mind of the average inmate or the above average inmate, to see what, our character looks like when we write them down on paper, and be able to explore and get ahead of his way of thinking to make the bust, all the way up to the they, which is the how of everything and how it happens, and how we can explore what our tactics lead to, so we can buttress them and we can fix them, and we can, be able to become those critical thinkers that are, able to, fight crime, suppress evil, strike fear and terror into the hearts of inmates all over the yard and throughout the country if necessary, and be able to, really, truly think in a way that makes us all safer. So, when you take this back, and hopefully you will, and you talk to people about, becoming critical thinkers, and about using the idea of first person, second person, third person in all of these things, it gives you a blueprint and a guideline, and, use, all of your own stories if you can. Feel free to use mine, of course, but, put those things in there that really mean maybe more to your staff, because they have a different experience than I have. And, they have a different facility, institution, department, different laws that they operate under. But just know this, from the tactical to the strategic, if we can do this and do this well, we need not have some of the, the tragedies you know, and, you know, dead officers and dead inmates and everything else that's negative that goes along with this. I don't believe that we can ever stop it all, of course, but hopefully videos like this can and will make a difference. This is Russ Hamilton. I'm signing off.